Hello, everyone. Welcome. And we are very, very happy to have another speaker for our IFPD podcast series. Today, we have amidst us Dr. Manpreet Sethi. I hope you've been tuning into our podcast series and have liked the episode so far. I will now open the stage and request Dr. Manpreet to kindly introduce herself before we start with the podcast.
Hello, Tanya. Thank you for having me on this podcast. And I'm really looking forward to answering some important questions on nuclear energy. I am a distinguished fellow at the Center for Air Power Studies, which is a national security think tank based in New Delhi. And I'm also a senior research advisor at the Asia Pacific Leadership Network, which is a network of senior leaders, and it is headquartered in Seoul. Happy to answer your questions now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sethi. We've seen that 2023 was a very, very eventful year in terms of a lot of geopolitical updates that we saw. Can you provide us some insights into India's ambitious plans that were shared by the Atomic Energy Commission Chairman Ajit Kumar Mohanty, as he had done at the IAEA? And for the ones who don't know, it's the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. Do you think that there is a lot of breakthrough that we can achieve in terms of net zero emission targets this year?
Yes. On the nuclear energy dimension, India's goals for electricity production have always been very ambitious. But for various reasons, the potential of nuclear electricity generation has not been realized. Though the program started rather well soon after India's independence, as some of you might know, India had set up its Atomic Energy Commission in 1948 itself, which was just after independence. But the progress of our nuclear power program was affected by the conduct of the peaceful nuclear explosion in 1974. Even though peaceful nuclear explosions were then the norm, and many major countries were undertaking this technology. When India tested it, the fear then amongst the major powers, and here I'm referring to the US and Soviet Union at that time, the fear in the US was that this was like an explosion that could take us to the bomb as well. Though India then didn't travel in that direction at that time, it did lead to the creation of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Some of you might have heard of the NSG. So the Nuclear Suppliers Group was put into place, and this put technology denials on India's nuclear power program. So it slowly chugged along with indigenous efforts through the 1980s and 90s. But after the opening up of our economy in 1990s, by the 2000s, there was an increasing need for electricity, which was felt, and this drew attention to the expansion of the nuclear sector once again. So it led to the negotiation and the conclusion of the Indo-US nuclear deal that enabled the NSG, which had been created to put technology denials on India, to exceptionalize India from these denials. So once this happened and India could partake in the international nuclear commerce, there was much enthusiasm, and as many as 20 imported high capacity reactors were envisaged that would come up in India in 8 new nuclear parks. So every time a nuclear reactor is established, there is a certain acquisition of land that takes place, and there is scope always for adding more reactors. That always exists. But India in 2008 was thinking about 8 new nuclear parks coming up with land acquisition. And it was then thought that India would reach 20,000 megawatt by 2020. So the 22 gigawatt that Mr. Mohanty has spoken about now, if everything had gone well, India would have reached that target by 2020. But unfortunately, Fukushima, the accident in a nuclear reactor in Japan, happened in March 2011. And this then impacted public sentiment. So a reassessment of the goals was undertaken because uh, public sentiment and public attitude about nuclear safety had to be addressed. Uh, the goals have been tempered from what they were in the past. And now, as you have mentioned, Tanya, Mr. Mohanty has indicated that the plan is to go to 22,000 megawatt by 2031. Now, to put things in perspective, The Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which is the main operator of India's nuclear power plants, currently is running 23 nuclear reactors. And the combined capacity of this is around 7,480 megawatts, so just less than 8,000. So to go from this figure of less than 8,000 to 22,000 megawatt in less than a decade will not be easy. But India is looking at several new reactors coming online. So we've got the Kudankulam reactors in the south of India, which have been built with Russian help. And these are 1,000 megawatt capacity reactors, two of which are already operational, and four more are likely to come online in the near future. In fact, two of them are in advanced stage of construction. The government has also given approval for 10 new 700 megawatt reactors, which will be indigenous. So now, to put things in perspective, the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which is the main operator of India's nuclear reactors, is currently operating 23 nuclear reactors with a combined capacity of 7,480 megawatts, which is just short of 8,000 megawatts. Now, to go from here to 22,000 megawatts in less than a decade will not be easy. But India is looking at several developments. Firstly, of course, there are the Kudankulam nuclear power plants, which are being built with Russian help. These are expected to come online. So, two of these of 1,000 megawatt capacity are already operational, and four more are likely to become operational in the near future. In fact, two of them are in an advanced stage of construction. The government has also given approval for 10 new 700 megawatt reactors, which are indigenous technology. And these again are at various stages of construction. And according to the minister in charge of atomic energy, one plant should come online every year for the next decade. Then we have the prototype fast breeder reactor, which is expected to become critical soon, and then fast breeder reactors will follow. So if all hands are placed on the deck, we could get close to the target that has been mentioned by Mr. Mohanty at Vienna last year.
All right, all right. Thank you so much, ma'am. That's a lovely way to put things in perspective. What we did want to understand next was, I mean, there's a lot of buzz around climate change. We had the COP28 recently. And one of the things that makes nuclear energies more compelling, the fact that it's emission free and the emission free characteristics makes it a more viable climate change solution. What I did want to understand from you is, do you think nuclear energy overall would help us address the kind of challenges that we have in a current climate because of changes in the climate? Yes.
Yes, Tanya, you're very right. Climate change is one of the primary drivers in today's time for nuclear energy once again. As you remember, we have spoken about nuclear energy renaissance at different points in time, but the potential hasn't come through. So I would say in the contemporary scenario, there are two drivers for nuclear energy. One, of course, is the need for electricity. And this is not going down, it's only going up. And for a country like India, there is a very high need for electricity. In fact, according to the estimates of the Central Electricity Authority in India, the electricity production will have to double in the next decade, given the economic growth that India is sort of pegged for. But the important thing to do is that you need this electricity production, keeping climate change concerns in mind. So while in the past, countries like China and India, built a lot of coal-fired nuclear plants, which were easier and quicker to build in order to fuel our electricity requirements. But now the climate change concerns has put a kind of a ceiling, and therefore the need is to move away from fossil fuels, which generate a lot of greenhouse gases, and therefore you want to go to non-fossil sources. So, amongst the non fossil sources, renewable energy, particularly solar and wind, have shown a lot of potential. And there has been a phenomenal growth in both these directions. But there are limitations of renewable energy as well. It's not available all the time. It's available only when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. We don't yet have very good storage batteries for retaining electricity when it is being generated and keeping it for when it is not. Compared to this, nuclear energy is a more reliable base load source of electricity, which means that this electricity is available all the time, 24 hours. So therefore, nuclear energy is expected to play an important role in India's future energy mix as a way of mitigating some of the climate change concerns that we have in this direction. So I think the vision of the country is to move towards reducing our fossil fuel consumption, which is currently at 50%, and moving more and more towards renewable and nuclear. So, the figure that you spoke about earlier, about what Mr. Mohanty had said, if we can achieve that in the future, we will be moving to say about 5% of our electricity then coming from nuclear. And there can be rapid expansion thereafter if we move towards the three-stage program that we have spoken about.
Yes, Dr. Sethi, that's absolutely right. I had another question. How does India's nuclear liability law, the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act, which is shortened as the CLNDA, impact civil nuclear cooperation? Do let us know your thoughts on that.
Well, yes, this is a very important question again. Mobilizing investment for the construction of nuclear power plants is an important factor. And this can really hasten the growth or slow down the growth of the nuclear power program because these are very capital intensive plants. So you need a lot of capital right at the beginning to be able to set up a nuclear power plant. Though I should also point out, I think, Tanya, that the cost of construction of a nuclear power plant is comparable to that of a large hydro project or even uh, an LNG, a liquefied natural gas plant. But the risks which are associated with nuclear power plants are considered to be very different. And this adds to the cost and makes that capital that much more difficult to get because of the concern about the costs. So, the most important risk in the case of a nuclear power plant is obviously that of an accident, though it has a very low probability. And the nuclear industry spends a lot of energy in terms of its research and development and efforts towards establishing very high safety standards. And that's the reason in the whatever 70, 80 years of nuclear power plants that have been running across the world, there have been only three incidents of accidents that have taken place in the nuclear sector. And the number of deaths in these accidents because of radioactivity or radiation has been extremely low. I mean, you can count them in less than hundreds, compared to, for instance, what happens in coal mines or the pollution inflected, deaths, etc., that happen because of the use of fossil fuel. So that's just to get you to understand the safety standards that the nuclear power sector takes, extremely conscious efforts about. But even if it's a low probability, if an accident of this kind was to happen, the impact can be huge. And therefore, the issue of liability. If there is an accident in a nuclear power plant, then who bears the cost of providing compensation to the victims? And that's where this law that you're talking about comes into the picture. Now, this became an issue for India after the conclusion of the Indo-US nuclear deal in 2008 that I mentioned earlier, when the possibility of private international suppliers or builders into nuclear reactor field in India came into the picture. Because up till now, it was only the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, which was the operator and the constructor of these plants. So now, if private industry was also going to become a player, then who would bear the cost in case of an accident? That was the issue. And India then created this domestic legislation which is the Indian law on civil liability on nuclear damage. Now, the norm across the world is that in case there is an accident, then it's the nuclear operator who will bear the cost of that and provide for compensation. But the Indian law brought in the aspect of the supplier also becoming liable for payment of compensation. And this became an issue because if the NPCIL, which was going to get the supplies and operate the nuclear power plant, is going to take the right to recourse from the suppliers, that they will be able to, the NPCIL is going to pay the compensation. But the NPCIL can reach out to the suppliers to seek that compensation for them for uh, a faulty part that has led to the accident. So, this was what created the problem and which dampened the spirit of the private industry to participate in India's nuclear expansion. Now, to get around the problem that the law had created, the Indian government has come up with some rules to reassure the suppliers. But the private investors at the domestic and the foreign level are not fully reassured by this because the law still stands. And it's going to be very difficult to amend this law, one, because of public sentiment, and the other, because the government of today was exactly the one that, as opposition, was pushing for this very hard law to come into being. So we are in a quandary here. I think the answer lies in getting the private industry on board in India, the domestic private industry on board, and that will then create perhaps a positive sentiment for the foreign industry also to start participating in the Indian nuclear power program. Because if we want to expand rapidly, then we do need the private players at the domestic and the foreign level to be participant in this program.
Right. India does have a fairly indigenous nuclear power program. Do you think you can provide us an update on the current status of India's three-stage nuclear energy program? Do you think any milestones have been achieved so far? What kind of challenges? What kind of opportunities? Perhaps a SWOT analysis of what it looks like so far.
So, India's conceptualization of the three-stage program is rather unique. No other country has this kind of a power program that it has laid out on the nuclear front. It was done so by Homi Bhabha, who is considered the father of India's nuclear program. And in coming up with this concept, he was looking at fully utilizing India's vast thorium reserves and getting over the problem of the limited uranium reserves that we were estimated to have. So he, along with other pioneers of our nuclear program, came up with the idea that the Indian nuclear reactors would be set up in three stages. So the first stage would have what we call the pressurized heavy water reactors. These use natural uranium with heavy water. So the good thing about India in adopting PHWRs was that you were using natural uranium because enriching uranium is a more difficult technology, and we were going with natural uranium, but with heavy water, which is relatively easy to master the technology of producing heavy water. So we were going with natural uranium and heavy water to produce electricity. And the waste which was generated in the PHWRs would then be reprocessed to extract plutonium, which would act then as a fuel for our second stage of the reactors. So, as you can see, the waste of the first stage is becoming the fuel for the second stage of the reactors. Now, the second stage reactors would be the fast breeder reactors, which would use the plutonium from the first stage and also breed more plutonium to produce also U-233. Now, uranium 233 would then be used in the third stage along with thorium to generate electricity. Now, the reason it has been put out in these three stages is because you can only use the waste from one stage as fuel for the other and generate more plutonium and U-233 to go on to the thorium. There is no way of jumping from one stage to the other. There is a technology which is involved here, and that has to be undertaken. Now, as far as where we are currently, We are currently fully functional on stage one. So the PHWRs, as I mentioned to you, we have nearly 19 of them which are operational out of the total of 23.
Right.
For the second stage, a prototype fast breeder reactor is almost ready, and it is likely to become operational hopefully this year. This has been said by the Department of Atomic Energy for several years by now, but I think they are being extra cautious with the new technology because any untoward incident at this stage will have huge consequences. And the world itself is watching India very carefully in this space because no other nuclear energy producing countries are moving in this direction right now. So it will be a very pioneering effort by India. Once a few FBRs or fast breeder reactors become operational, India will be able to graduate then to the third stage. Research and development for this stage of advanced reactors using thorium is already going on simultaneously. And from the energy sufficiency point of view, then, if we were to move to the thorium utilization, I think India will have a fairly high level of energy security and sufficiency because you will then be relying on your own sources. But this will take a few days to materialize.
Okay, that's excellent and actually a very positive outlook. I also wanted to understand because you did say that India has been a forerunner and there have been a lot of pioneering efforts that India is making in terms of tapping its nuclear capabilities, considering that nuclear energy is the fifth largest source of electricity in India. It contributes to about 3% of the total electricity generation. How do you assess its role in the overall energy landscape? What kind of factors contribute to its prominence or the limitations in India's energy mix?
So, as I said earlier, nuclear energy stands out for India as an important part of its energy scenario for two reasons. One is the challenges that we face in the present energy mix. And as I mentioned to you, nearly 50% of our current energy is coming from coal as a part of the fossil fuel sources. So, overall, fossil fuels, which includes also oil and gas, makes up for nearly 60% of our electricity generation. But the problem here is not just the greenhouse gas emissions that come from this kind of utilization of fossil fuels, but it's also that the domestic, coal quality is rather bad. So it creates more ash and more problems then for air pollution. It's our coal reserves are also concentrated in very narrow sectors of the country, which puts a strain on our railways because quite a lot of the rail network is tied up with supplying coal to other parts where fossil fuel plants are being utilized, which then leads us to a huge dependence on oil, gas, and coal imports from outside. So our dependency, even for fossil fuel sources, which are generating and creating more climate change, issues, is extremely high. Then we are, as part of our energy mix, we have the renewables, which includes solar and wind. It is a sector which is growing rather well, but as I said, there are problems with continuous availability of this electricity. Besides storage, the batteries don't have that capacity right now. Also, the amount of land which is needed for setting up solar or wind farms um, is extremely large for the kind of capacity utilization that is existing. India has the largest solar park in Madhya Pradesh in Rewa, which is producing, I think, around 1600 megawatt of electricity. And the land which is utilized for this is several times more than what a nuclear power plant would use, because nuclear is a dense source of electricity. Lesser amount produces more heat, which is then converted into electricity. So therefore, when you look at all of these factors, nuclear stands out as something which can be most useful. The factor that holds nuclear back is largely public sentiment. So, public acceptance of nuclear energy, because of the concerns that are generated in case of any untoward incident that happens anywhere in the world, um, create, has that impact. And therefore, to address that, I think what is most important is to get the people, the common man, and I think you are doing that in, through a podcast of this nature. Get the common man to understand that our electricity requirement is extremely high. People in the urban areas well understand this because we use electricity for everything. From the time you get up in the morning and switch on your geyser and start charging your phone, to putting on the mixie to make a smoothie for yourself, using the microwave for heating your breakfast, you are using electricity for everything in today's times. So therefore, the requirement is high. And if you want to address the climate change concerns, because these are affecting us today, we understand that the intensity and the frequency of severe incidents, environmental incidents, is growing. So climate change is not something which is happening elsewhere or in a different world. It's happening now and it's affecting us. So if we need to address both these dimensions of increasing electricity production but reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then we have to look for low carbon sources. And amongst the low carbon sources, nuclear energy really is the second largest, source of electricity today, which is low carbon. So therefore, we must look at this seriously. We must try to reach out to people to get them to understand the compulsions that we are facing, and to explain to them the kind of safety measures that the nuclear industry takes, in order to ensure that no untoward incident takes place. It is a high risk technology, but it is coming with the consciousness of how you need to address some of those risks that exist. And that's where I think we have to keep the public educated, and we have to keep the nuclear industry on its toes so that no complacency comes in and there is no chance of accident. So that's where I would say nuclear energy fits into India's energy mix.
Right. I think Dr. Sethi has been absolutely correct in highlighting how the public really needs to be educated, as well as the nuclear industry being on their toes. I wanted to reiterate that. I also think it's a lot about perception. And I think our last question to you, Dr. Sethi, would be that in contrast to the perception of nuclear energy generating a lot of significant waste, and I think it really troubles the public sector to focus on an issue like that for very obvious reasons. Do you think that we, as India and an Indian nuclear community, have adopted a closed fuel cycle philosophy? Can you explain how the three-stage nuclear power program it follows the reprocess to reuse philosophy and treating spent fuel as waste, but as well?
In my earlier question about the three-stage program, I think I did address this to some extent, but let me explain again that what is unique about India's program is that, unlike what some of the light water reactor technologies in the US or Japan have been doing, is to use the uranium once and then discard it as waste. Whereas what we are doing is using the uranium, uh, and the waste which is being generated is not being discarded, but it is being reprocessed and reused in the second stage of our program. So therefore, the waste generation problem, which is huge for many countries, especially when they are when they are operating hundreds of reactors like it happens in the US, and for them the waste generation issue is a major issue. But for a country like India, which is following a cycle where the waste is becoming, as you said, the fuel for the next source, and therefore a wealth, in that sense, is something that reduces the amount of waste that we are generating. So it is not a huge issue. And I think the Indian Department of Atomic Energy is already looking for geological repositories on where the final waste uh, will be stored. And I'm also very hopeful that the human ingenuity will be able to find answers to how you're going to address the waste problem. It is not as big as the perception of this problem is. And again, as I said, public education has to be the answer to all of this. If we can reach out, especially to the young mind in schools and colleges, explaining to them the philosophy that India is following, I think public perception about nuclear energy can change.
Right, Dr. Sethi, that was extremely informative. Moving forward, especially because you've highlighted throughout the podcast to us that how nuclear power does have a bright future, especially in India. Could you read us any tea leaves? Could you tell us what kind of forecasts would you have for the upcoming year?
Several factors impact sentiment, and that can then either slow down or increase the program. Fortunately for us in India, there is an all-partisan support for nuclear sector, and therefore, irrespective of which party is in power, which government is there, the focus or the drive, the momentum for the nuclear sector has been maintained. India, given the kind of relationship that it today has with several of the countries which are major nuclear suppliers, uh, has the capability, has the ability to be able to reach out to them for helping us out with our nuclear sector. The indigenous program is doing rather well. And as I said, there are a series of reactors that could come online. And on the technology front, we are seeing the idea of small modular reactors, you know, attracting a lot of attention, where you would have smaller reactors with low capacity, but built in a modular factory serial production format, which can then be quickly built. Because one of the concerns is that nuclear reactors take a long time to build. But if they can be, built through this kind of a factory production mode, that problem can be gotten over. So, on the technology, on the geopolitical, on the party support, I think there's a lot going for the Indian nuclear power program. The effort should be, as I said earlier, two pronged. One is public outreach to try and explain to them why nuclear energy must be a part of our mix, and for the Department of Atomic Energy and the nuclear establishment in India to try and fulfill the kind of targets that have been set so that public confidence in this source of electricity would grow.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Manpreet. This has been an extremely engaging podcast, and I hope our viewers and our listeners got a lot to take from it. Thank you for sharing your nuggets of wisdom. For all the young ones who are watching, Dr. Manpreet, did you have any parting notes, any advice for especially folks who are interested in the nuclear policy space as well as international relations as a whole ambit?
Well, yes, this is a field which is attracting a lot of attention at this point in time. So whether the nuclear space comprises both energy as well as strategy and non-proliferation and disarmament and technology. So for students from all uh, disciplines, there is a lot of scope here. There is a lot of um, you know. Uh, information which is waiting to be discovered. So I would strongly recommend keeping an eye on this space. And for those who are interested, in fact, on the nuclear strategy dimension, on the weapons dimension, I had started a column last year in January called Nuclearly Put, where I'm trying to put nuclear issues in a clear format. And since India marked 25 years as a nuclear weapon state last year, I had started this monthly column, which I concluded in December 2023. And for 2024, my plan now is to continue the column for clearly putting out some of the nuclear energy dimensions. So all of these writings are available on the website of the Center for Air Power Studies. And for those of you who are interested, please do follow Nuclearly Put to try and understand my perspective on how to bring clarity to these rather complex issues.
Surely. And what we'll do as IFPD is link this in our bio. So please do go and watch and tune into all the updates that Dr. Sethi writes. Thank you so much for sparing so much of your time today. I hope the viewers and listeners have had a good time tuning in. Thanks once again for watching IFPD Podcasts. We'll see you for the next episode.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.